The Three Masters, by John Binns and Alexander Leiths. The stars looked down coldly upon a planet's chill night side. Below, an icy wind blew across a hillside, sending waves through the grass-like vegetation covering its gentle slopes. A creature, looking for all the universe like a common terrestrial rabbit but for its 3 ears, crouched and shivered as this same wind ruffled the fur upon its back, blowing against the nap and forcing icy fingers down towards the skin. The creature looked up furtively at the moonless, pin-pricked sky, and its nose twitched in anticipation of danger. Just then the wind changed direction, and the animal's central ear became erect in a position of alertness. Its body quivered and hummed, a harp string in resonance with some faintly heard sound. The creature ran from that hill then, ran as if its life depended upon it, its bouncing rear growing ever smaller as it receded. Just before anyone atop that hill would have lost sight of it through mere distance alone, the creature vanished under a line of thick, bushy plants. Back on that hillside so recently vacated, had anyone been there to hear, the sound would have been clear to them now. It was the sound of laughter. The switching of the wind distorted, muffled, amplified, and threw the sound, but could not silence it. What had started as a single voice, a lone clarion call of insane mirth, now became two similarly affected beings laughing as men might laugh at children, if those men were psychotic and the children on fire. And yet there was nobody to be seen on that hill. 2 voices became 3 instruments joined in a symphony of insanity, rising and rising all the time until the sky itself seemed to echo back the sound. And still they laughed. It was about 20 minutes to closing time at the Arthritic Fox, nestled in sleepy little Wilton. Not that that meant a great deal to the landlord of this quaint rustic establishment. Horace, for that, to his mild irritation was his name, was well known in the village for keeping whatever hours he pleased. Indeed, more often than not, several days could pass without any actual closing time being enforced. Tonight, however, was slow, so slow that he was in fact alone in the place. He was just contemplating closing early when the front door opened, partly through the effort of the man now entering, and partly through the efforts of the chill night wind. This was also having a great deal of success entering the inn, until the newcomer put his weight against the door and finally forced it closed. "Morning, Jack," Horace said good-naturedly, nodding slowly in the man's direction. This was his traditional humorous way of greeting his most regular of customers, Jack the Poacher. "For God's sake, Horace, it's 11:15 at night, you silly old fool," Jack said impatiently. This was his traditional response to Horace's humour. Horace replied, accompanied by more nodding and a relaxed smile. "Give me a pint of best, will you?" Horace eased into action to fulfill this request. "Catch anything tonight, Jack?" he asked casually. Jack the Poacher had never been entirely happy with his name. He felt it gave the police a certain advantage. Philosophically, however, he reasoned we all have our crosses to bear. He reached inside his coat and dumped a large rabbit on the bar. "Now, would you look at that one, Horace?" he proclaimed proudly. "Certainly a big one, all right," Horace said, handing Jack his pint. "Cheers." "Yep, but that wasn't really what I meant." "No?" "No." "What then?" "Damn it, man. It's got 3 ears." Horace looked down again at the brown furred body on his bar, and was indeed surprised to find its ears were more numerous than your run-of-the-mill bunny. "Well, I'll be," was his considered assessment. "It sure is the damnedest thing," said Jack. "I blame all this pollution and stuff. Before that came along, all you'd have is your odd 2-headed lamb born at midnight, and you'd say no more about it." Horace agreed wholeheartedly. Jack had just started to ask about the day's racing results when they both thought they heard a sound. As they listened, it became clearer and louder. 3 voices, each raised in manic laughter. Jack and Horace looked at one another, puzzled and perturbed. The laughter intensified. Far towards the center of the Milky Way, a star was entering its death throes. A red giant, who had consumed his nearest planetary companions long ago, had finally reached the point of terminal indigestion. At its fiery core of ferrous plasma there was nothing left to consume. In a blink of an eye, it collapsed to form a super-dense ball of neutrons. The outer layers, suddenly unsupported, rushed into the newly formed void at near a seventh the speed of light. They crashed into the pristine neutron star and ricocheted out in a tremendous blinding explosion of matter and radiation. As this material from the outer layers raced free into the universe, nothing, of course, could be heard. However, looking at one patch of this hurtling nebulous material, focusing on just one helium atom within its mix of elements, and measuring the vibrations of this solitary atomic building block, then, translated into a sound wave, something recognizable could be heard. High-pitched and squeaky, the sound of 3 men laughing insanely. To look from orbit, the planet Mundus looked fairly harmless. Indeed, one might almost describe it as pretty. Looking down now at the Terminator, that line dividing day from night, a striking view of this world could be seen. On the daylit side, the 50-50 mix of land and sea produced a wonderful patchwork of continents and oceans, blues and greens from water and vegetation, the tan of the deserts and the blue-white of mountain peaks and polar regions. The night side existed in shadow, the only relief from this darkness the lights of settlements and towns. One collection of lights not far from the Terminator belonged to Huktan, the most important city on the planet. The sparse number of lights belied the city's vast size, many of its inhabitants preferring to do business under cover of darkness. Indeed, a mere hour before, while the city still enjoyed the last rays of the afternoon sun, it would have seemed like half a city, its narrow, twisting streets sporting far fewer inhabitants than you would expect for a metropolis of this size. Now in darkness, those same streets were as full as they had been in daytime, but with a completely new set of individuals. Most of the buildings were poorly constructed, with barely any care taken to urban planning. As a consequence, the alleys between the buildings were unlit, unclean and a maze to trap the unwary. Among these streets many inns thrived, serving not only as places of refreshment and drunken pleasure, but also as marketplaces for the many traders of the night. The hank-spanking Monkey Funk was one of the most disreputable of these establishments, among establishments whose reputation was already far from savory. Inside its walls, primitive oil lamps competed with aging neon signs to see which could provide the least useful illumination. The oil lamps would gutter, throwing crazy shadows tumbling around the room. In response, the red neon advertisement would buzz on at random intervals for a fraction of a second, as if to say, "Well, I'm here, Mr. Oil Lamp, but I choose when and whether I come on." Given the advert generally flashed about once or twice an hour, it was fairly confident it had the edge in pointlessness over the oil lamps. Both of these had, of course, forgotten the mock streetlight atop the bar, whose single obsolete filament bulb had remained blown and unchanged for the last 20 years. It exuded smug superiority. The bar itself was tall, wide and wooden, giving the barman an impression of solid, reliable safety, a barrier between himself and his mildly psychotic customers. This was, of course, precisely the impression the owner wanted it to give. The owner lived outside of the city in a nice little mansion in the countryside, and would not have been seen dead in the place. This was precisely how most of his barmen were found. The majority of the seating in the inn had been put into alcoves. This had been achieved in spite of the architectural problems involved. Indeed, some of the alcoves were entirely freestanding. This was because the owner had found that alcoves always filled up the fastest, privacy being good for his clientele's business, and what was good for their business was good for his. There were 3 tables with chairs in the narrow space between the front door and the bar itself, but these were rarely used. Tonight, however, was an exception. A hooded figure now sat at one of these, alone and muttering to himself. The hood, which obscured much of his face, was part of a black gown, frayed and torn in places, which looked much like a monk's habit. From the sleeves, skeletal hands wrung and clawed, the blackened, blistered skin cracking as they moved. Looking out from beneath the cowl were two pain-ravaged eyes, maddened still further by the great intellect trapped within. His face was as blackened and sore as his hands, with much of his nose eaten away, making it seem almost skull-like. Beneath this nose sat a large brown moustache. The door of the inn was flung wide. In strode an extraordinary-looking man with long curly hair, floppy hat and enormous scarf. Immediately in his wake sneaked a rough-looking fellow with a knife drawn, ready to pounce. Just then, with a noise like a male voice choir singing, "Whoop!" the ruffian seemed to fold in upon himself and, with a strangled yelp, disappeared. The doctor walked on, oblivious to this. Somewhere in the recesses of the pub, an irritated voice cried, "Oh, bloody hell!" The doctor walked up to the bar and clapped the barman on the shoulder, saying cheerfully, "Hello there, my good man. A pint of stout, if you'd be so kind." The barman automatically flinched as he saw the doctor's arm coming his way, and was just reaching for the disruptor beneath the bar, when the doctor's words registered and he realized he was ordering a drink. "A what?" The barman's question was delivered in a surly manner, to disguise how rattled he was by the whole shoulder-clapping experience. "Stout. A dark brown liquid containing alcohol?" the doctor ventured helpfully. The barman looked at him as if he were a child. "Sir, all the drinks served here are dark brown." The doctor seemed cheered by this answer. "A pint of your best dark brown drink, then, if I may?" The barman, still unsure of what a pint was, duly poured a glass of the cheapest local brew for the doctor. The doctor turned away from the bar with the drink, when his attention was caught by a loud cough from the barman. "Doesn't sir usually pay for his drinks?" the barman said with heavy sarcasm. The doctor thought for a moment. "Well, actually, now you come to mention it," he stopped short when he saw the muzzle of the disruptor rifle creeping up from behind the bar. "My, but you have that well trained," the doctor remarked as he reached for his purse. He handed him a gold coin, which was obviously off-world, and which was also worth more than the bar itself. The doctor took his drink and sat opposite the cowled man. He was currently playing with the melted wax taken from a candle on his table, rubbing it into the back of his left hand. He then flexed the hand. There was a sharp intake of breath, followed by a sigh of defeat. He looked up now at the doctor. "Stranger," he hissed, "you have chosen well to sit here, for you may learn much that you may profit by." "Really?" the doctor replied excitedly. "You see, to be a prophet would be extremely useful to me in my line of work. I never really know what's going to happen next." The cowled man looked at the doctor in silence for a moment. He then decided that he could not understand this stranger, and continued with his own line of discourse. "Have you ever considered the possibilities of interspecies fusion?" he croaked, staring intently at the doctor. "Well," said the doctor slyly, "some of my companions have worn some fairly fetching outfits." Again the cowled figure looked nonplussed for a second or two. "Consider, if you will," he continued, "the potential of, say, a fusion of baboon and kangaroo. The marsupial fierceness of the kangaroo's head, coupled with the thrusting power of the baboon's hindquarters. Think, man, think. Imagine the terror just one of these could cause. Now imagine 1,000, 10,000 of these creatures, an army at my beck and call, power beyond your feeble imagination." As the hooded man finished, his hands clawed skywards in exultation, clutching and grasping, flakes of skin falling onto his upturned face. The doctor looked disinterested and made to finish his pint and leave. "Fascinating as this is, I feel there are other things afoot in which I should be involved," he said. "Wait!" the dark being hissed, grabbing the doctor's wrist in a vice-like grip. "I have already had some small measure of success," he rasped painfully. "Only this evening I sold my prototype piranha frogs to a gentleman in dark glasses. Imagine the ferocious gnashing teeth of the piranha coupled with the thrusting power of the frog's hindquarters. Would you call me mad now, sir?" The doctor pulled himself free. "To do so would be pointless in the extreme. I wish you the best of luck in your endeavours, but now I must bid you adieu." With that he doffed his hat and headed towards the door. The door was partially open, and when the doctor reached it he pulled it the rest of the way and made his exit into the night beyond. As he did so, the bucket perched on top of the door tipped over, spilling its contents onto the hapless working girl sitting at the table behind that door. She screamed as, leaping and tearing, the piranha frogs devoured her entirely. Then they asphyxiated. A wordless howl of frustration came from one dingy corner of the pub, which was closely followed by a man with dark, slightly greying hair and goatee beard, dressed in a high-collared, black-spangled gown. He also sported a pair of Ray-Bans. He sat down in the chair only recently vacated by the doctor, leant across the table and grasped the cowled figure by the shoulders. "Do you know who that was?" The man snarled through clenched teeth. The mustachioed creature recognized him as the purchaser of the piranha frogs. "Who?" was the hissed reply. "Yes." "What?" "The doctor, you senile old fool," the man in the Polaroids cried, shaking the other violently to emphasize his point. A shower of blackened flakes fell from the hooded man's juddering body. "I see," he replied shakily. "So you can stop assaulting me now?" The bearded man stopped and removed his hands from the other's shoulders. The cowled figure raised a blackened hand and toyed with his bushy brown moustache. "And why should this fact mean anything to me?" The bearded man tore off his glasses to reveal his face. "Because I'm you," he announced dramatically. "Pleased to meet you, Hugh. I'm known as Stromea," the other replied. "Oh, for God's sake, let me give you a clue. I'm known as Mr. Eats." The bearded man spoke as if to a child. "Hugh Eats?" the cowled figure hissed politely. "No!" the bearded man yelled. He leant across the table once more, and with a swift yank pulled the cowled figure's moustache off. A large portion of the blackened top lip remained glued to it. "I am the master!" the bearded master cried. "You are the master! We are the master!" "Shh!" the cowled master hissed, grabbing back his moustache and replacing it on his face. With no glue to hand, he was forced to hold it in place. "Put your glasses back on," the cowled master continued. "We must remain incognito." The bearded master sighed, but did as requested, replacing his glasses. "Do you now understand?" he asked the cowled master. "How can you be me?" the cowled master ventured through his broken lips. "Well," the bearded master replied calmly, with self-assurance, "you didn't plan on staying in your present condition forever, did you? Suffice to say, one of your plans worked, and I am your future self. Now, would you answer me one question?" "Certainly." "Why didn't you kill the doctor?" The cowled master shuffled uncomfortably, more than his usual baseline discomfort. "Well, I didn't actually recognize him, and even if I had, he showed no interest in my plans. The fool, does he not realize the potential for interspecies fusion?" Yes, the bearded master interrupted hurriedly, stifling a snigger. "You already told me your plan when I bought those useless piranha frogs from you." "And what, may I ask, is your plan?" the cowled master countered. The bearded master leant both elbows upon the table and clasped his hands together. "The plan is as subtle as it is fiendish," he began. "Tomorrow afternoon there will be a meeting between the two most powerful meat vendors in this city, a meeting which I brokered. There, these two giants of the meat-based food product industry will sign a contract which I drew up. The contract will fix the price of sausages between the two firms, and will fix it at a level 10% higher than before." This last sentence was said as a triumphant finale. However, the blank expression on the cowled master's face told the bearded master he would have to elaborate further. "This increase in the price of sausages will have a small but noticeable impact on the nutritional well-being of that largest proportion of the city's population, i.e., the poor. This discomforting of the masses will surely come to the attention of the doctor, who will certainly attempt to stop the signing of the contract. Since I know exactly when and where this signing will occur, it will be simplicity itself to place some deadly device at that location, primed to detonate when he arrives, thereby ensuring the destruction of the doctor." In spite of the bearded master's second triumphant finish, the cowled master was frowning. Since he had no eyebrows, and his face was already heavily wrinkled, the bearded master could not see this, thus forcing the cowled master to voice his concerns. "And how, exactly," he asked, "will the doctor's death benefit you?" The bearded master's eyes filled with anxious confusion for a few seconds. When he replied, it was in a somewhat rushed manner. Well, with the doctor gone, no one will stand in the way of the price increase, and, it is but a short step from mass slight malnutrition to universal domination." The cowled master remained unconvinced. "Have you considered the possibilities of interspecies fusion?" he began, then stopped. Both masters now noticed that a man was standing over them. He was a burly sort, the kind who usually worked as a bodyguard in a city so well suited to that profession. This particular individual seemed even more vacant than the norm, given that he stared off into space as he addressed them. "My master wishes to speak to you. You will follow me." "And what if we do not wish to?" the bearded master replied imperiously. "You have thrusting power in your hind quarters," added the cowled master, casting an appraising eye over the man. The man seemed to think for some moments, his eyes never leaving that point 5 meters beyond that back wall of the inn. "My master says if you do not come, you will be late." The two masters looked at each other. They both knew a threat when they heard it. "Lead on, my good man," said the bearded master with forced conviviality. The two masters rose and followed the henchman out into the night. The two masters followed the burly henchman through the back alleys of Huktan, keenly aware of the many denizens of the night, all unscrupulous and possibly deadly. Yet neither showed any signs of concern. Whatever dire intentions these pitiful creatures had were mere child's play compared to the unspeakable machinations concealed within their own numerous hearts. The bearded master strode purposefully, freezing the advance of any overly curious bystander with a simple gesture of his hand. The cowled master limped and shuffled with no less purpose, dissuading the curious with a simple gesture of his face. At last they arrived at what appeared to be a small, run-down wooden warehouse in a district they knew to be near one of the many waterways which oozed through the city. The bearded master sensed an unwholesome, inky blackness creeping upon him, swallowing all that was good or joyous or born of light. He could practically smell the evil, as if filling his nostrils, threatening to overwhelm even he, usually inviolate in his own Machiavellian majesty. The realization dawned that the cowled master had silently shuffled up close to him, invading his peripheral vision as well as his other senses. It could also be the nearby river, he reasoned. The bearded master took a step or two away from his cowled counterpart. He was about to demand an explanation of their guide when a loud yet languid voice exuded from beyond the warehouse doors. "Enter!" The henchman opened the door, and together they did as instructed. The warehouse was almost entirely empty, save for the dim illumination afforded by 2 rows of guttering, anachronistic, and dangerous flaming torches. At the end of this aisle, demarcated by these fire hazards, sat a man on an enormous ornate throne of ebony, inlaid with intricate designs in obsidian and gold. The man was relaxed, his arms draped lazily over those of the great chair. His attire was not exactly kingly, but spoke of power, a black frock coat and suit with a modest standing collar. This collar in turn helped frame the face of a man in appearance a little older than, say, the bearded master, with hair of black but heavily streaked with iron grey. He also sported a large goatee beard and moustache, but it was the eyes, those intense, penetrating eyes of unbridled power, which wrenched the attention of all. "Ah, gentlemen, at last you have arrived," he announced. "Henchman," he continued, "my thanks. You may take the rest of the life off." With that, the henchman collapsed to the floor, unbreathing. "Who are you?" It was the bearded master who now spoke. "You seem familiar somehow. Have we exchanged pleasantries at an alms fair, perhaps?" The seated stranger threw back his head and roared with laughter, suddenly startlingly animated. "Of course, I'd forgotten my disguise, my apologies." With that, he reached up and grabbed his black goatee beard, and with a flourish ripped it free to reveal a black goatee beard. "Behold!" he cried triumphantly. The bearded master gasped. "It's you!" "You mean you," the stranger countered with a smile. "You must be a very common name in these parts," hissed the cowled master. At this, the bearded master and the stranger both turned to regard the cowled master with the exact same look of contempt. Beyond this shared glance, their faces also bore other similarities, and yet were clearly those of different men. Still, dimly confused signs of recognition began to show upon the cowled master's blackened and flaking visage. Unfortunately, due to the disfigurement, his expressions were not easily read. The stranger rose from his throne and strode down the 3 steps from the footrest. He swept towards the cowled master, who took a step backwards in spite of himself. "I am the first master," the stranger said, thumbing his chest with some irritation. He stopped just in front of the cowled master. "You?" The first master continued, pointing to the cowled figure. "Ah, the second master, he who came after me. Gallifrey, help me." The first master now jerked his thumb towards the bearded master. "And he is the third master who came after you, a sartorial improvement at the very least." The second master's eyes widened in comprehension and shock, causing much of his forehead to shower to the floor. "We are the master," he rasped triumphantly. "Exactly," the first and third masters said patronizingly and simultaneously. They then glanced at each other awkwardly. The third master broke this by gesturing for the first master to continue. "Come, we have much to discuss." "Come where?" asked the third master. "The throne is a door." The third master nodded his understanding. This was not shared by the second master. "I hope you flushed," he hissed. The first and third masters simply stared at him for a moment. Then the first master reached into his pocket and withdrew a small plastic device with a single button. He pressed it, and a small hitherto unseen LED in the right arm of the throne flashed twice, accompanied by 2 bleeps. The entire center of the throne seemed to crack open and fold in upon itself, revealing a rectangle of pure, blinding light. Silently, the first master walked into the light and was consumed. The others followed. The first master led the others into the pristine whiteness of his main console room. He strode purposefully to the center of the chamber and touched a lever on one of the panels there. The doors whirred shut, and the first master turned to watch with pride their efficient gliding action, the eyes of the other 2 following his. As the doors completed their motion, his attention was caught by something unusual and out of place. He noticed the normally unbroken purity of the white floor was now defiled by a trail, starting at the now closed doors. With annoyance barely concealed, he noted that the trail appeared to consist of small black fragments or flakes. Tracing these, he found the trail ended at the feet of the second master. The first master brushed his irritation aside, regarding it as insignificant in comparison to the importance of his plans. In spite of this keen sense of proportion, he still allowed himself to succumb to pride as he moved to demonstrate a new addition to his TARDIS. Reaching once more towards the main console, he picked up a black rectangular object, slightly longer than his hand. "Gentlemen," he said, cocking his head to address his companions directly, "observe." He pressed a button on the device, while the others waited in anticipation. On the floor near the wall they were facing, 3 panels slid open. 2 of these were about half a meter on their front side, while half that size deep. Between these 2 holes lay a third, as deep as the others but 5 times wider. From these holes rose 3 ominous objects of terrifying simplicity. The 2 smaller holes allowed 2 entirely black cuboids to ease into place. From the third hole, rising slowly into position with eerie grace, came a circle of bottomless midnight black, 2.5 meters in diameter, supported on a plinth made from a matching black material. This plinth itself, rising 1.5 meters from the floor, was entirely featureless like every other part of the device, save for 4 silver letters in the top right-hand corner, S, O, N, and Y. "I asked for it in matching white," the first master said with an air of wistful regret. "But while the electronics manufacturers of this planet may be highly efficient, they are uncompromising in their aesthetics. Besides which, this was the last one they had." As he spoke, he set the remote control back down upon the main console. The second master reached out a cracked and clawed hand and idly picked it up. "But what is it?" the third master asked with some impatience. "Patience, my friend. All will be revealed in good time," the first master replied soothingly, folding his arms across his chest. The third master looked at him in a puzzled way. The first master continued to smile knowingly. The third master looked at the second master. The second master looked at the third master, then across to the first master. The first master's knowing smile had taken on a somewhat fixed appearance by now, as he looked first at the second master and then returned to the third master. "The machine," he continued with a slight cough, "is a spatial temporal observational device." "Play that funky music, white boy!" blared the 2 cuboids suddenly and loudly. The third master jumped, clapping his hands to his ears. The second master's eyes darted about as he looked alternately fearful, then embarrassed, his finger still pointing to the button that he had just pressed on the remote. The first master, his composure slipping partially as he snatched the remote back, allowed a snarl to begin to form upon his lips before restoring both his serene expression and silence. "Sorry," hissed the second master. The first master's smile was a little frosty as he stated, "That is one of the additional features." He turned coolly to face the great black circle and pressed another control. Instantly a scene appeared before them. It was night on a windswept hillside. Below them they could see a nervous-looking bunny rabbit with 3 ears. The second master pushed forward, gripping the edge of the plinth with blackened talons, his eyes aflame with excitement. "Look!" he rasped, pointing towards the creature. Seemingly in response to his utterance, the rabbit bolted down the hill. The second master continued to keep his gaze fixed upon the receding animal. The third master looked questioningly at the first master. "The device can transmit as well as receive," the first master explained patiently. By now the second master had lost sight of the creature, but its image and the offspring of that image were fully perceptible to him. "It had 3 ears! Did you see 3 ears?" he hissed excitedly. "Imagine the possibilities, a fusion of rabbit and badger. The ferocious head and 4/4 of the rabbit, with enhanced oral capabilities, coupled with the thrusting power of the badger's hindquarters. Think, men, think! Imagine the terror just one of these would cause. Now imagine 1,000, 10,000 of these creatures, an army at my beck and call, power beyond your feeble imaginations." The other masters frowned, looking at each other. Meanwhile the second master had begun to chuckle, a hideous, tortured sound, like a rusty gate being beaten with a live goose. The third master, struck by the ludicrous nature of the second master's plan, began to laugh also. The first master looked at both his future selves, and shaking his head began to chuckle ruefully. "Let me show you a different location. I want you to see just how fine the controls are. I'm going to alter the temporal and spatial coordinates by just the smallest fraction." The scene changed, and what they saw confirmed the second and third master's suspicions that the planet they were looking at was in fact Earth in the latter half of the 20th century. In the pub before them, they saw 2 men discussing the body of a 3-eared rabbit. "The fools!" hissed the second master. "I cannot be so easily thwarted." He then began to laugh insanely. The other masters joined him for their own particular reasons. The first master changed the scene again. This time they witnessed the beauty and majesty of a supernova. The third master, who had watched both this scene and the previous one with some interest, now spoke. "The power we have just witnessed, so great and yet so unfocused, so potent and yet so purposeless, has moved me beyond measure. I feel inspired, and this inspiration's fruit grows within me even now." He looked significantly at one master, then the other, before continuing. "Why don't we use the device to tamper with the beer in the arthritic fox's cellar so that it goes off?" he proposed with specific gravity. The second master frowned and hissed gently, scratching the back of his right hand. Flakes of blackened, charred skin fell to lie invisible upon the surface of the plinth. The first master stroked his beard, his expression of curiosity belied by the wry smile he was attempting to hide. "Well," the third master continued, "everyone knows how the doctor loves to protect the earth, and that he seems to have a particular affection for the traditional English way of life, namely beer." The light of realization failed to dawn on the faces of either member of his audience. The third master sighed wearily. "He will naturally come to investigate this mass fouling of English goodness. Once in the cellar, we can use the power of this device to focus the energy of a supernova into the cellar, finally destroying the doctor once and for all." With his final words, his voice lifted to a triumphant roar, the last syllable running on into powerful, throaty laughter. The second master, caught up in the mood, added his own wheezing giggling. The first master, relieved now of the responsibility of hiding his amusement at the plan, now laughed openly at it, covered by the laughter of the others. Still chuckling, he asked politely, "How exactly will the doctor's death be of benefit to us?" The third master stopped laughing and looked at the first master as if wondering whether he had misjudged his character or his intellect. The first master was not to be put off by such bravado, and while maintaining a polite smile, made a circular motion with his right hand to encourage an explanation from his colleague. Well, the third master started awkwardly. With the cellar destroyed, and I'll grant you probably the pub too, there will be no one to serve beer to the inhabitants of Wilton. And with the doctor out of the way, there would be no one capable of standing in the way of our starting our own pub with sole control over the supply of beer to the local populace. And of course, from there it is but a short step to total universal domination. Once more he had built to a crescendo. However, it was clear, even as he finished, that he had failed to move his audience. The second master was staring blankly at him, while the first master was again stroking his beard, one eyebrow raised. "I think we'll just stick with my plan," the first master said gently but firmly. "Or more precisely, your other plan," he continued, pointing to the third master, "involving the dear mayor of Mundus, only with some important alterations and additions. And you," he now turned to face the second master, "you too shall have your part to play, your own peculiarly fixated ingenuity harnessed to achieve our ultimate goal, for truly it is a somewhat shorter step from planet-wide to total universal domination." The mayor sat back in his chair, allowing the aging wooden struts to give slightly under his not inconsiderable weight. He gazed across the broad expanse of the mayoral desk, strategically decorated with a single pen holder, complete with conspicuously expensive fountain pen and designer lamp angled towards the mayor. He saw beyond, pacing nervously across the center of his spacious office, his tall and angular aide wringing his hands, pausing only to glance at his watch. The mayor still puzzled over exactly when his aide had gained the extra 6 inches of height. Probably, he thought, around the same time that he had taken to dressing exclusively in black and grown the stylish goatee beard. Since then, he had seemed both peculiarly nervous and increasingly focused, as if planning for something, and it was certain that he had organized today's meeting with an almost obsessive drive. A brisk knock at the door caused the aide to freeze in his well-worn tracks, and the mayor signaled for him to allow the visitor to enter. The aide in turn signaled his understanding and in a commanding voice said, "Come in." A curly head with broad grin attached hove into view around the edge of the door, swiftly followed by a ridiculously long scarf complete with ridiculously long body. The mayor was glad the doctor had seen fit to attend the meeting, but wondered for a second whether he ever wore clothes suitable for such formal occasions. The aide, for his part, seemed unsurprised by the doctor's appearance, and indeed had adopted a suddenly tense air, clenching his hands in a claw-like manner as if something had angered him. "Doctor, I'm so glad you could come." "It was no trouble. I wouldn't have missed this for the world. Or any world, for that matter," said the doctor with a disarmingly broad and toothy grin. Without invitation, he lowered himself into the comfy chair the mayor reserved for his more distinguished guests and swung his feet up onto the desk. "Besides," he fixed the mayor with the wide-eyed stare of a frenzied madman and spoke in a deep, booming tone, "the results of this meeting may turn out to affect the future of the entire galaxy." The mayor stared back at him. "We're talking about sausages," he said levelly. The doctor continued to stare, apparently undeterred. "Oh," he said. As if on cue, the door opened again and a butcher entered, followed by an aide of his own. The butcher wore his ceremonial stripy apron with the regulation blood spatters denoting his rank, and white trilby of chipolata, Mundus's ancient but nowadays rarely worshipped god of meat products. This new butcher was noticeably leaner than the mayor, a further indication of their relative status. The scarcity of Mondasian meat was such that only the richest butchers could afford to buy enough to eat their fill, as well as make a profit. The mayor's ascendancy in the trade over the years could easily be traced by his increasing width. The inches of his stomach reflected the number of years in the business, like counting the rings on a tree trunk. The lean butcher's assistant was thinner still, with a pale, ill-looking complexion, and bravely sported a foot-long ginger handlebar moustache. The mayor extended a podgy hand towards the butcher, his palm upwards, and said in a stilted ritual manner, "As we meet here now." At the same time, the butcher retrieved a medium-sized salami from its traditional place of concealment in the front of his trousers and laid it gently but firmly in the mayor's outstretched palm. He responded in a similar voice, "Let the meat bind us always." The mayor took the spiced sausage and placed it in the top drawer of his desk. "Anyway," said the mayor's aide, reaching into his jacket pocket and brandishing a thick wad of papers, The contract! He placed it on the desk. The mayor stood and walked over to the other side of this masterpiece of municipal mahogany so that he and the butcher could more easily look at it together. As the two of them studiously perused the document, pausing occasionally to flick over to the next page, the doctor peered over their shoulders with increasing impatience. Finally, the doctor looked up from the contract directly into the eyes of the mayor's aide, his head cocked on one side, a distinct look of disappointment on his face. "This is all about sausages," he said. "Yes!" the mayor's aide exclaimed gleefully. The doctor stared. "You're sure there isn't anything more to it than that?" He craned his arm past the mayor's and flicked to the last page, peering at it carefully. No small print about galactic domination? The aide seemed momentarily distracted, as if struck by a sudden thought, then returned his gaze to the doctor. "Not in any sense unrelated to sausages," he said. The doctor rolled his eyes before addressing the mayor and the butcher. "Gentlemen, I wonder if you would excuse me while I visit your lavatory." He exited swiftly before the mayor even had a chance to nod. The four men returned their attention to the contract. Moments later, their concentration was broken by a mysterious wheezing, groaning sound from the corridor outside. The butcher looked towards the mayor with a puzzled frown. "Are you sure he's all right?" "Why don't you go and check?" the mayor's aide suggested. The butcher nodded and left the room. Barely had the door closed when a noise suspiciously like the sound of a man being viciously clubbed from behind and slumping to the floor came from outside. When the butcher came back into the room, he appeared to be slightly taller. "Is he all right?" the mayor asked. The butcher frowned and carefully adjusted his face. "Who's all right?" he said. "Oh, good, I am relieved," said the mayor. "Shall we return to the contract?" "Indeed. I think we should sign it without delay," the butcher said. "In fact—" and here he fixed the mayor with a steely, almost hypnotic gaze that made him sorely tempted to run sobbing from the room. "I think it is imperative that we do so at once." In the sudden tension of the moment, the mayor found himself blinking uncontrollably. "Damn!" he yelped, as he felt a contact lens drop from his right eye. He stared in vain at the desk for a full half a minute, and attempted to ignore the butcher, who appeared to be muttering something and snapping his fingers in an attempt to get his attention. "What?" he said eventually, looking up from the desk and realizing that the other contact lens had fallen out too. "And you will obey me," the butcher appeared to be saying. Through the fuzzy blur, the mayor could just about make out a flourish of annoyance as the butcher slammed a pen down on top of the contract. "Oh, do what you like," he said petulantly. "What? No, I was going to sign it anyway," said the mayor. "Now, where's the dotted line?" As he peered at the inexplicable mass of print, he heard the butcher and the mayor's own aide muttering to each other under their breaths. "Before we sign," said the butcher eventually, "I think my assistant has something to do outside." "Do I?" the butcher's assistant was now saying. "Yes, in the corridor. Go on." The mayor looked up to see a tall, ginger-moustached fuzzy blur shrugging and leaving the room. Oddly, it was followed by a mysterious noise, remarkably like the sound of someone being tripped up, bound, gagged, injected with a powerful sedative, needlessly felt up, and dragged into a cupboard. There was a pause and a faint sound of sniggering before the assistant returned. The mayor peered at him. It was difficult to tell without his contact lenses, but he could have sworn that the butcher's assistant looked distinctly unwell. He struggled to put his finger on it. "Have you, had a fall or something?" the mayor asked gingerly. He'd wanted to say been in an explosion, but somehow it seemed impolite. His hand brushed over two small plastic discs on the surface of the desk. He returned them to his eyes, blinking and sniffing as his eyesight was restored. "Gosh, that's better! Oh, my good God!" the mayor exclaimed as the butcher's assistant swam into focus. A look of panic crossed the assistant's blackened and flaking face. His hands rushed up involuntarily to pat the foot-long ginger moustache he was bravely sporting. His whole demeanor relaxed as he realized that it was firmly in place and with it his identity. The mayor continued to stare at him in a highly disturbed manner for several seconds before finally shaking his head and looking back to the butcher once more. The butcher's assistant chose this moment to flash the mayor what he hoped was a reassuring smile. The effect was spoilt slightly by three of his front teeth falling with the faintest of patters to the desk. Fortunately, this ill-conceived experiment in public relations went unnoticed, as the mayor was by now deep in conversation with the butcher. The butcher, however, gave his assistant a subtle, sidelong, disapproving glance and dismissively brushed the decaying dental work onto the carpet. "Right, I should sign this thing. Could I borrow your pen?" the mayor said to his aide, who promptly passed him one, a long black affair with a bulbous top. "At last," his aide said, a little unnecessarily. "Everything is finally in place. Oh, wait!" He grabbed the pen from out of the mayor's hand just as he was about to sign and replaced it with a standard blue-inked bic. "Sheesh, that was close." The mayor signed the contract with a flourish, then thought better of it and put his name instead. There was a sudden stillness in the room. The mayor felt somewhere deep within his soul that something momentous, life-changing had just passed, and he could feel a vibration of energy in the air. He thought he could also detect a slight hum coming from his desk. This change in atmosphere was further emphasized by the three others in the room suddenly arranging themselves to stand shoulder to shoulder on the opposite side of the desk. They each seemed to increase in stature as they pulled themselves up to their full height. The mayor's assistant and the butcher with an easy air of authority, the butcher's assistant with a faint cracking sound. "Oh, my dear mayor, you have been naive," said the aide. With that, the butcher, standing in the middle of the three, grabbed his nose and with a theatrical flourish pulled his face clean off. The mayor looked up in horror at his own face. "Oh, I wanted to do that," the aide whined petulantly, before pulling off his black goatee beard to reveal predictably another black goatee beard. The first master, still wearing the replica of the mayor's face, shook his head in disgust and sighed heavily. He consoled himself with the thought that nothing else could undermine the grandeur of his own revelation. Just at that moment, however, the butcher's assistant whipped off the foot-long ginger moustache with careless abandon and cried, "Ta-da!" The mayor was stunned, his mouth agape, as his eyes rolled upwards to peer at the single ginger eyebrow he had suddenly acquired. Undeterred, the first master gave an evil smile. "Regrettably, sir, it appears we have no further use for you. And," he added apparently as an afterthought, as he plucked the mayoral staff from the desk, "the psionic harmonizer is mine. Now, release the creatures." The second master, who had appeared to be in some discomfort for the last few moments, fumbled under his cloak and revealed an unreasonably large sack. Something inside it appeared to be struggling violently. "Have you ever considered the potential of interspecies fusion?" he demanded of the mayor, just as around a dozen angry-looking cobra sloths leapt from the bag, propelled by the powerful thrusting hindquarters of the cobra, and devoured the mayor in an instant, robbing him forever of the opportunity to reply. The three masters stood in silence for a while, as the ferocious front ends of the sloths nibbled and burped their way through the remains of the mayor of Mundus. That went quite well, didn't it?" the third master said, seeming almost disappointed. "I thought perhaps someone might try to stop us." "There is one final problem," said the first master. "Didn't you have some device planted in here to destroy the doctor?" "Oh, bugger!" the third master exclaimed. Meanwhile, the dozen hungry cobra sloths had finished their meal, and the first master started to realize they had another final problem. The desk chose that moment to turn itself into a very small, highly localized black hole. This deadly device had the unusually fortuitous effect of sucking all the cobra sloths into a single infinitesimally small point, killing them instantly. Its job done, the black hole desk then evaporated conveniently out of existence. There was another moment of awkward silence. "That appears to have dealt with that," said the first master. "Yes," said the third master. "Our plans have, totally succeeded." All three masters frowned, as together they experienced the unfamiliar sensation of victory. One of them coughed. Nervously, as if expecting at any moment to find their plans come to naught, they shuffled over to a balcony at the side of the room, overlooking the city. As the sun rose over the sprawling metropolis, all the denizens of the night still living were making their weary way home to bed. The three masters glanced at each other again, and all found themselves gripped by a curious tugging at the corners of their mouths. One by one they began to giggle, then chuckle and finally guffaw with insane, maniacal laughter. This carried on for several hours and then several more hours before it finally paused for a brief moment. Then began again.
Masters, mistresses, the Doctor requires materials in order to maintain the TARDIS and ensure continued functionality. He similarly requires carbon-based comestibles to sustain his own biological functions and existence. Master would never say this, but he requires aid beyond that supplied by this unit in order to acquire these. To aid the Doctor in his various tasks and creations, this can be most effectively achieved via Patreon or Substack subscriptions, or through donations directly to PayPal. Or if you desire physical goods in return for your contributions, written accounts of my travels with the Doctor are also available on Amazon. Links are in the description below. Thank you, Masters, mistresses.